right. Well, welcome everyone. We're excited to present another webinar today, hosted by Technion Data Solutions. So I am Joshua Milligan, and I'm presenting with Bridget Cogley. We're both consultants at Technion Data Solutions, and very excited and grateful to Technion for hosting these webinars. And as you can see, Technion is a proud partner with Warescape, Alteryx, and Tableau. So we're excited to be working for Technion and serving our clients. And if you ever have any needs related to data uh, or anything around that space, we'd love it if we had the opportunity to work with you. So I'm going to turn this over to Bridget to kind of kick things off, and we're excited to have you.
All right, well, thank you, Joshua. So we are here today for none other than a preview of Maestro. So this is a glimpse of Tableau's exciting new data prep tool. And so without too much further ado, I will throw out a few disclaimers, and then we will get right to it. First and most important is that Maestro is in beta. So anything you see here today can and will likely change. So that could be the UI, that could be some of the process. Again, this is beta software, and so we know that betas will definitely change and evolve. The other thing that we don't know, anything to do with pricing, licensing, timeline, that sort of thing has not been made public, and so we cannot provide any information or insights towards that. And then also, both Joshua and I are still working on becoming experts, so certainly as you look through our work, there may or may not be opportunity to improve what we've done. So cannot guarantee that we've done the right thing. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of the data puzzles we've got today. The first being, I've got a sample coffee shop, if you will. And so I've got a schedule that we've so kindly done in Excel, and this looks like schedules I've had in the past where we've got things like the day, we've got the time frames, Monday, 9 to 5, we've got Leah working, Luke's taking the day off because Mondays are notoriously bad. And we've got Ray and Finn kind of balancing out the evening shift, and Yoda fills in as needed. Sounds a lot like some movies that we've seen. Moving on to work, we've got this lovely timestamp where we can see that Leah checked in. We've got a timestamp for her checked in. We see lunch is out, lunch is in, and finally out for the day. And we can see this repeated over and over for our employees. Now, bringing this directly into Tableau, we can see that this would present some problems, so we definitely need to shape the data. So this is where we present none other than Maestro. So we can see where I've pulled in my schedule. If we click on schedule, we can kind of get a preview for what this looks like. We can either pull in a sample or we can use all the data. I've got a small amount of data. It just uses the default sample. I've got a quick select. I can random sample, or I can be a little bit more thorough. I can also select the fields that I'm pulling in. So for example, with my schedule, I see I've got employee, and then I've got each day of the week and including some sample values. So that's kind of the data source number one that I'm pulling in. I'll go ahead and just briefly pop down to the second data source just so you can see that I've also pulled this in. So what next? You can see where I've got these steps. And so if I right click on this, I've got the option to remove, I can rename, and I can also open a sample in Tableau. So if I want to kind of see what happens and what this looks like in Tableau, I can always say, okay, well, I've done this step. What does this look like in Tableau? And it will very kindly pull this up. So you can see that it's actually pulling this up now, and I can kind of see what this data would look like at each individual step, both in the preview window and in Tableau. I'll go ahead and exit out of that. So I've taken my schedule where it was Monday through Friday. I've decided to pivot it. I'm keeping employee out, and all the other fields I'm putting into the pivot. So what we can see from the results is I now have got all my days as dimensions. I can kind of scroll through this. I can see my employees, and I can get a feel for, okay, this is kind of looking the way I want it to. Now, I still have things like scheduled hours, which is an absolute mess, and we'll see how much more of a mess it is. So typical kind of manual processes, we put these things together and we can start to see that, okay, I need to filter out certain things where people haven't worked. I need to start grouping and replacing. So I've got a lot of where, for example, I had 2. I've got some garden variety variation where I've got 5 p.m. instead of 5:00 p.m. And so Tableau makes it very easy for me to just group and kind of combine those things, Tableau Maestro. And so you can also see as I go through here, I can create a number of different calculations, so I can kind of split these out. We'll see this actual flow a little bit more in detail with Joshua. So we will see a live build, but we can see here where I can actually track through my changes. I've made 9 total changes. I do have some really nice icons at the top to help guide me through this process. So I can see where I've done some grouping and renaming. I can see where I've calculated fields and filtered all in one step. So you can see I've made these changes. What I've done is I've started kind of pivoting certain things out, making some additional dimensions. So now I have a start time and end time, and also a total minutes for this particular group. One thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the aggregate to just tidy this up. I could very easily remove those fields. However, I do want to just make sure that these are extra tidy, so I chose to use the aggregate. It's just another way to make sure all of these are combined together at the levels I want them while removing some of the fields I don't want. So I don't need number of records. I don't need this original start and end time in the time because I made that minutes calculation already. And then I don't need where it originally had the scheduled hours grouped. So I can kind of start cleaning this up, pulling in start and end times very nice and tidy. I'll do some renaming so that way I've got scheduled employee and minutes scheduled and scheduled day, so that as I do my join, I kind of know what's what. Again, that's personal style. So moving back from this join, I'm going to go down to worked, and then I'll cover the join a little bit more. So again, you can see where I'm pulling in data. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm actually going to flatten this and prepare this for shaping the data so that I can make 4 rows into 1 row. So for example, I've created a calculated field and pulled out timestamps, and I've said, okay, I need the day as its own field, and now I want in as its own field, out as its own field, lunch as its own field, and kind of the lunches as their own fields. From there, I'm using aggregate once again to just kind of flatten this and actually allow those dates to become their own columns. So I chose to do min. You could also do max. Again, lots of choices, and then I'm grouping by the date, the day, and the employee. So all I've done is flatten the data a little bit. It went from a number of rows down to a fewer number of rows, so it's a bit wider rather than taller, just to allow me to do the type of analysis I wish to do. The other thing, once I've done that, I'm going to start calculating the minutes between my shifts, my lunches, and then also total worked minutes. Oh yes, you don't want to work for my coffee shop. I am tracking this down to the minute. Finally, I've got work day and also worked employees. So I've renamed, prepared it for this join. Now, what's really neat about this is I can kind of put these joins in. Tableau will make recommendations on joins. So originally I didn't have certain things in here, and it said, well, hey, you may want to include this. The other thing I'm doing, because sometimes I have people scheduled and they don't show, or sometimes people come in and cover when they're not scheduled, I am doing a full outer join. If I want to change this, it's very easy to click on these different pieces and take them on and off. And so you can see where Tableau then shows me what's matched and what's unmatched. So I can see, for example, on scheduled, I've got 3 incidences where somebody was scheduled but did not show, and I've got 4 incidences where people worked but were not scheduled. So we'll dig into what's happened. Once I've got this join, the final piece I want to do is start doing some additional calculating and cleaning up the data so that way I always have an employee name, just because sometimes there's null employees when they've not worked and so forth. And I'm also doing the same thing for days. So I'm just ensuring that no matter what, I always have my day and my name for something. And we can kind of see where we've got some of these nulls, and that is to be expected from the type of analysis I'm doing. One of the other things is as I'm exploring my data in Maestro, I can kind of click on data, see it highlighted, and really get a good preview of what this data looks like and is composed of. So I can kind of see where people have more hours, or where they've been scheduled, and kind of what parts of this that they compose. So I can kind of see lunch duration. Okay, somebody's taking very short lunches. So I can already do a certain level of just data discovery right within Maestro itself. And then I can also see down here what the individual rows look like. And if I choose, I can actually manipulate the data right in here as well. I don't need to at this time, but it's definitely an option where I can go through and manually update data right here, just as I would in the data source itself. And that typically will create a group. The final piece is I can write this to a number of different platforms. So I've got the option of CSV, TD, or Hyper if I'm using the beta. At this time, I'm actually going to use CSV, just partly because I can. So that's a newer feature added in this current version. This is beta 2. So if you are not yet part of the beta, I definitely encourage you to sign up. The final piece, I just came up here, hit this play button. It tells me it's finished running the flow. And so now what I can do is I can go to my dashboard and check and make sure. So I will just go ahead, and since I'm using an extract, I'll go ahead and refresh. I could also write this directly to TDE. I will say that if you do that, you do need to close out the program. So you would need to close out Tableau. So I've refreshed this, and now I can figure out what's going on with my employees. I can see who's working, the different people who are absent, and I can pick on Luke and say that Luke went to Act 2. And figure out kind of where people are. I can see who's taking lunches, who's not, and also kind of start to begin to understand my schedule. So that is the beauty of being able to go from very unformatted data to a single unified data source in Tableau that looks nice and tidy and gives me exactly what I need. And so the final review, just what this looks like in Tableau, you've got kind of some nice tidy steps, some aggregating, joining, and then finally putting it out to the file. And with that, I'm going to turn over my Maestro demo over to the Maestro himself, Joshua Milligan.
All right. Well, thank you, Bridget. I feel like I want to do Star Wars and Maestro together, but anytime you can bring those together, it's exciting. Uh, Also, really good idea to have a Yoda-themed coffee shop. I think someone may own the trademark on that already, but if you could, that'd be great. So let's back up just a bit from a demo and just think about what Maestro is and kind of how it works. Now, like Bridget said, we're becoming experts, but we're not there yet. So I don't know that I know everything that Maestro's doing or how it fully works under the hood or behind the scenes. But uh, let's talk just a little bit about my current understanding. So, as you add connections, you're going to add connections to all kinds of different data sources, anything from file based data sources like Excel or text files or even Tableau extracts, or server based data sources. So, lots of them that you're familiar with, SQL Server, uh, all kinds of other ones here, including cloud-based data sources. And I would expect, again, this is beta, I would expect this list to grow. I don't know what the final list will look like when it's released, but I definitely expect more options here. But even so, where it is now is very incredible. Because I can connect to all of these different data sources, and as I do that, Tableau or Maestro, I'm going to have to start learning the same Maestro. Maestro is reading those data sources and starting to pull in some of the data. And sometimes, depending on the size of the data source, it will pull in a full amount of the data, or you can adjust it. It may be sampling the data, and you can adjust some of those settings. But what it's doing is it's pulling it into the Hyper engine. So we saw Tableau for a couple of years at the Tableau conference. They've been hinting at Hyper. Now Tableau 10.5, which is in beta, is using Hyper, and so is Maestro. So all of this data is getting pulled into that Hyper engine, and that's why, as I work with it, I can start to see it step by step. And every step along the way, I'll start to see these grids filled out. Uh, and I may have to wait for it for a bit, but you'll start to see them, and you can see the changes that are going on, and everything. So that's kind of how it's working, and then I'm building out a flow of steps with joins and aggregations and unions, so that I'm shaping the data as I go along. I may be bringing in supplemental data, and finally working towards an export of some kind. And you'll see here I've got multiple different options. I can export it to a TDE, which those of you who are familiar with Tableau, for years that's what we've used, the Tableau data extract. But now Hyper, you can pull it into a Hyper extract, or even export it into a comma separated values file, which can be used elsewhere. So all kinds of different options of what you do with your data, but the goal is that you're creating and shaping it along the way. So again, I would have loved to have done something fun like Star Wars, but I'm going to take a look at maybe something a little bit more practical. Let me make sure that I've gotten everything closed out that I want. So this is a scenario which I hit recently at a client that I was working for, and as with a lot of projects, I started to discover that they had lots of different data sources. Now, I didn't have Maestro to use as I was working on that project, so I did most of this within Tableau Desktop itself, which worked, and it worked pretty well. But I would have been excited to have had Maestro, because what they had was they had most of their data in Microsoft SQL Server. And the data specifically that we wanted to analyze had to deal with their employees taking trips and purchasing airline travel. And so the questions were, where are they going? How much are they spending? Uh, are they purchasing tickets early, late? Are there fees involved? All kinds of different things that we wanted to analyze. And their main ticketing system dumped all of the data into SQL Server, and then they had an employee table, or here we'll call them passengers. So all of that data was on SQL Server. Seemed pretty straightforward at the beginning, but then they said, oh, but there's one airline that doesn't use our main ticketing service, and that's Southwest. So what we do is we just dump each year into CSV files, and we'll store those in a directory. And so we started out with maybe just a few files, but then have the realization that every year we're going to get a new file dumped into that directory. So that could be a challenge there. Bringing that data in. And then the client said, oh, and we saw this really cool Tableau dashboard or visualization online where there were these lines that came out of the origin to the destinations, and we want to see that in Tableau. So can you show us all the flight paths that are going on? And so then I realized, well, I'm probably going to have to grab some supplemental data to geocode that. And so I was able to pull that in. That turns into another data source, in this case, Excel. So how do we pull all of this together? Well, we have lots of different options, but I would have loved to have had Maestro as I was doing this. So I'll pull up Maestro and kind of walk through what I might have done if it had been an option. So Maestro comes up like this and allows me to do certain things, open up recent flows. So you'll see TFL files are the flow files, and that is all of the data that tells it how you're bringing in different data sources and joining or unioning them together. I'm going to start a new flow just by connecting to the data. And I'll start with that SQL Server data source. So as soon as I remember what the name of the SQL Server is, there it is, and we'll sign in. And so very familiar interface here of selecting a database and then selecting your tables. So here I've got airline ticket purchases. And you'll see that Maestro brings that up very nicely. It's starting to read the metadata and even sample some of the values, so I can see that. I can decide here if there are certain fields that I want to keep or not keep, or I can add filters. So all kinds of different things I can do here just with that initial connection. And then I'm going to start working with it. So I'm going to add a step, and now I can actually start to see the data. So I love here at the top, Maestro gives me a view of each field and then lets me see what the values in that field are. So what's the domain of values? And sometimes it does that with a histogram kind of view. Sometimes it does that by showing the actual individual values. And I can switch that around however I want. So I can just right click and say, I want to see the detail or the summary. So all kinds of different options there. And then Bridget already demonstrated that I could come in here and actually edit individual values. If I see ones that need to change, I get that option. I get all kinds of other options I can filter. So I can say, you know what, let's keep only certain dates or certain other fields. So I can keep only or exclude, edit the values. And so all kinds of different fun things here. I can create calculations. I can remove fields. All kinds of options for cleaning the data right there. So I've got my main airline ticket data in here, and I look at it and I realize that what I've got here is just a passenger ID. Everything else, there's a ticket ID, but I probably don't need too much more information about the ticket itself. I've already got the price. Uh, but the passenger, I'd like to know a little bit more about that individual. So what I need to do is bring that data in. So I've got a passengers table here. So I'll drag and drop that. And once again, I've got all the fields here. It's just the ID and the name, but that works pretty well. And what I'll do is I'll join those together. So grab here and new join. So fairly easy to drag and drop, and then we see the nice join step here that gives me a nice interface to understand my join. Very easily change it to left or right or inner or outer just by interacting with this Venn diagram here. So very nice. The other thing that I can start to see is as I look at this, I can start to understand how the join is going to work. I can see, okay, I've got my airline tickets, my clean one step here, which I could rename, uh, and I can see that's got 14,000 records. My passengers table has 630, and when I join them together with an inner join, I'm going to get all of the records from my main flow, none of them excluded. But there are passengers in the table who apparently didn't purchase tickets or who maybe purchased tickets that have been excluded from this table for some reason. But I'm okay. As long as every record in my main flow found a match, I'm good to go. And I can see the join fields here on the left and the results on the right, and everything looks great. So I like just adding a step here because I can do a little bit of cleanup. I realize I've got two passenger ID fields, one from each table. I don't need that passenger ID-1. I'll get rid of that one. And everything looks pretty good now as I look through the fields and I see the preview of the data. That's all looking good, except now when I look at airline, I see American, Delta, and United, but my client tells me that they have passengers who fly on Southwest. But that doesn't come into their main ticketing table. That comes into a set of files that they just dump out there in a directory. So I go to add, and I'm going to add a text file, navigate to the directory, and I find that as of now, there are 4 files there starting with 2014 through 2017. So I can only select one at a time right now, so I'll select one, and see that came in down here. I'll rename this just so I know this is my Southwest data. And I think, well, that's great that I've got one. Do I have to drag in each individual file as a new connection? No, fortunately not. I can actually do a wildcard union by looking at multiple files here and just saying wildcard union, and it pulls in all four of those tables, and you can see it's even added in a new field here that allows me to see which tables it's brought in, the file paths. So it's going to show me each file path. That'll be even more clear when I add a step here. Now I can see those file paths. It's grabbing each one of those files, and when we get a 2018 file, that should come in just fine because it's a wildcard, and I could specify different options if I said, well, as long as it says airline ticket purchases, maybe I'll put a star at the beginning so it picks up any other year, but no other CSV files. So I can get specific with it if I need to. But otherwise, what I want to do is I want to union this new part of the flow down here with the flow up here, but before that join, because I do have a passenger ID field here in the files that should be able to pick up the data in that passengers table. So I'm going to grab here and kind of drag up here and do a new union here. And when I do that, it is unioning, but it's branching it off as a new branch on the flow. And that's not exactly what I want. What I want is I want to connect here to the join. So no problem if I break this part of the flow, right click and remove that part. Now I can drag down here and just add that as a connector to the beginning. And if I looked at each one of these, so here's the union step. I love some of the options here because this allows me to find mismatched fields. And it's all color coded, so I can see, I've got a fare type and travel insurance coming from my Southwest data that's not in my other data. So that's interesting. The file paths is also there from the union, which is not in that main table, so that's fine. I also have an airline field that is only here from my main system. So actually, it might be kind of nice. Go back here and create a calculated field that just hard codes Southwest as the airline. So I create this field and save it, and you'll see now the Southwest data has Southwest here, and if I go to the union, I find that if I looked at only the mismatched fields, it's actually matched it up. So it figured it out by name, by name and type, that's the same field, and it actually brought them together. So now, if I find that airlines field, let's go here to the output here and look at airlines. There it is, and I see that I have 4 now. So I'm starting to bring all of the data together that I need. This is looking really nice. And I'm almost to the point where I feel like this is a data set that I could do some rich analysis on, and in fact I really could. But then I remember that the client wanted that view of a map, and they wanted the flight paths themselves. And as I look at the data, I realize I've got some options because I know the route. I see here the airport codes that give me the starting airport and the ending airport, but it's all together as one field. So to work with it, I might think about splitting that out. So on the drop down, I've got all kinds of different options for filtering and replacing, but I also have splitting. So I can do a custom split, but here I think automatic should work fine because everything's just separated with a dash. So I'll try it. And when I do and I look, I see my routes, route split 1, route split 2, and it did pull those apart very nicely. And in fact, what I see is I really only have 2 origins. So this is just Dallas or Fort Worth. So it's either Dallas or DFW, but there's lots of destinations. So all kinds of different destinations. So I rename it. You'll notice that all the calculated fields show up here at the left, which is great. And then it's alphabetized, which is fine too. Makes it fairly easy to find things. So I've got my origin, my destination. But one thing I know about Tableau is that when I go to Tableau and I want to generate that path view, I know from experience that I'm going to need two records. So not just one record that has the origin and destination in the same record, but I'm going to need one record that is the origin record, and then another record that's the destination, and that's going to allow me to draw the line between them. So the question then becomes, how do I get two records, one for origin and one for destination? Well, Maestro allows me to do something called pivot. And so if I click here, instead of just adding a step, I've got some other options. I could add an aggregation, an output, but there's also an option for a pivot. So I will add that pivot, and that's going to take multiple columns and turn them into multiple rows. This is very useful if you have a single measure that maybe is split across different columns. A lot of times in Excel sources, you'll see a measure that maybe it has a column for each year that measure was taken. Not very easy to work with and analyze data like that. But if you do a pivot, you can turn that into a single column, uh, and then you have just a single measure that you can work with. Here, I'm going to take my origin airport, drop that here into my pivot values, and I'm going to take my destination airport and do the same thing. So now what I've got is I've got my point, and that's my pivot name, but that's going to be my point. It's either the origin or the destination. And I've got my values here, which if I look down here, my pivot values, that's actually just the airport code, which is going to be kind of nice here in a second. So I'm going to call that one airport code. And you can see that that looks really nice. And then each row gets a label to tell me is it the destination or the origin. So I'm starting to get a data set that's structured just the way I need it. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in another data source that I can join to this one based on that airport code. And this new data source, which happens to be in Excel, if we just preview it, we'll see we've got everything from the airport name, the city and country, but here's the airport code, and I've got the latitude and longitude, which is going to be great for working with there. So I'm going to bring in this airport file. Since it was just one file with one sheet, Maestro automatically brings it in, and now we'll join these things together. A new join, you can see it automatically picked up airport code, tells me the results of an inner join, which is I keep everything from my main flow, so 9,210 records, and I only matched on 32 individual airports in that file. Turns out there were 7,000 some odd airports in that file, but apparently the data I have only has 32 unique ones, which is fine. So I've joined that together, and now I'm going to just take a look and just see if there's any cleanup that I want to do on my data source here. So I've got my airport code here, and I've got some things going on that maybe I can clean up. So file paths might be useful, I'll keep that, but fare type, didn't really care to keep that because it's got a lot of null values. It was only from one data source. Same thing with travel insurance, we'll take that one out. I don't need another airport code field, so I'll remove that one. This field called F5, I might be able to figure out what it is and rename it to something useful. For now, I'm just going to remove it. I don't necessarily care. Latitude and longitude, I definitely want. Passenger names, I look through here and I realize these all look good, except here's a funny name that isn't in the same format as everybody else. It's got a strange comma there. It's last name, first name, where everybody else just has first, last. So I can fix that one. And it does it right there. Everything else is looking pretty good. So at this point, I am feeling really good about what I have. I don't see anything else that I feel like I need to change, so I am ready to output my data. And when I do that, I get to select the options of how I want to output it, either as a hyper, a Tableau data extract, or a CSV. I think I'll do CSV, and I get to choose where I want to output it. This will work just fine, but I'm going to remember where I put it. So I'll just remember I put it in my Tableau repository. Hopefully, if I hit run flow, it will work fine, and it did. It says finished. And so now, let's take a quick look and just see if I got the data that I wanted. So Tableau repository, airline travel.csv. Let's pull that up in Tableau. So looks pretty good from the preview there. We'll open Tableau and take a look at the file here. So Airline Travel, the preview here looks great. I've got my latitude and longitude and airport codes and passenger names and IDs and ticket IDs and routes and ticket prices. So I've got a lot of rich data that I can do all kinds of analysis on. But just so that my client knows that that they're going to get exactly what they want, we'll build that map view just to make them smile. So here are the latitude and longitude of all of the different airports, and we'll look at we'll change it to a line, which is kind of interesting to look at that way, but not exactly what we want. If I put route on the path, we're getting closer, and if I put the individual airport code, or actually let's take the city and I put that on the label, but we'll right click, drag and drop so that I didn't hit the right click, but ideally it would be as a dimension. Oh, not, what did I do? Yeah, let's leave route on there, take country off, and change this one to attribute. And I might even take the point, which you'll remember was our origin or destination label, and maybe put that one on size, and again change that to an attribute so that we can get the individual size of that, and we get all kinds of fun things that we can do with this now, because we can take a look at things by the ticket price. We could take a look at things by the airport itself, but we can start to get the exact view that the customer wanted. And then in Tableau, I have all kinds of other options here in terms of creating additional calculations. I can take that route field again and maybe split it out again, because if I take that one, that route 1, and place that on color, now I can start to highlight things that came from Dallas or things that came from DFW, and I can do all kinds of fun analysis here. So that is a preview of Tableau Maestro, and I'm excited about it. I'm excited to see where it goes. Any innovation in the space is definitely welcome, because I just love the idea that people can get to their data and structure it in a way that helps them to do the analysis that they want, so that they can answer the questions that they need to.